Thanks, gentlemen. Really appreciate your testimony and a positive spirit that you bring to the bill. I like the idea of the net environmental impact, that consideration is something that will be made. And the question I've been wanting to ask for a while, and I think it's a perfect opportunity to ask it of you, is think about that same concept with regard to the provision of the bill that requires the department to limit its review if the project would have a positive economic benefit. Now, what I've been thinking all day as we talked about the different things that happen in wetlands is that maybe we should have a net view of the economic impact of a project, as opposed to just being required to say that if somebody's going to make some money on it, the department has to treat it differently. So as we think about developers or businesses or whatever entity wants to discharge into a wetland, presumably because they have an activity they want to engage in that they would make some money from, and that would have an economic impact. I keep coming back to what costs are we shifting to somebody else? And if the department makes a decision, good, bad, or indifferent, that down the road ends up in a site being flooded in a 100-year flood event that tears out a lot of roads or infrastructure, and we're shifting costs to local units of government, such as towns or counties, to clean up from that. Is that a consideration that you think ought to be evaluated by the department? And should we bring that same logic to the economic side of this as you suggested that we do the environmental side?
Are you referring to the demonstrable economic benefit analysis? Let's take a look at that. That's on page 27.
Right.
This relates to the practical alternatives analysis. The department is still supposed to consider off-site practical alternatives, unless they go through this demonstrable economic benefit analysis. If they go through that analysis and determine that it satisfies the criteria, then they look to on-site. On-site practical alternatives are only one consideration as part of those three prongs that I talked about before. They still look at the minimization aspect, and then they still consider the holistic net environmental benefit approach. So that net, or that demonstrable economic benefit analysis, is a very small part of the analysis and only related to whether or not we're going to narrow the scope of practical alternatives to on-site or adjacent alternatives. It is not the entire test. It's the department at the end of the day, if they don't feel that the project results in a net environmental benefit, and I'm using that term to generalize the analysis they go through, but if they don't feel that the proposed project results in a net environmental benefit, they can still deny the permit.
Understood, but the language you just talked about, the positive economic benefit. I mean, is there any project that you could imagine that wouldn't have a positive economic benefit for somebody? I mean, how many projects are not going to be considered to be that way?
Remember, that's only one criteria.
But it's a criteria that puts the whole permit application into a very different scenario, where those other options are now restricted.
But actually, Representative Clark, from the developer or the project advocate's point of view, it doesn't. And you could even argue that under some circumstances it would make it harder on the project applicant. Because if there truly is some off-site alternative that is a less environmental, or less, sorry, I'm getting tongue-tied this afternoon. The bottom line is still the bottom line. The project has to have a net positive environmental, not economic, a net positive environmental impact, or the department will reject it.
Right.
So by limiting your alternatives analysis, what you're actually limiting is requiring a property owner to chase all over the county to find other alternatives that may or may not work. It doesn't get him any closer to project approval. At the end of the day, you still have to meet that test that Tom pointed out in the bill. It has to be a net benefit to the environment, or it doesn't get approved.
Well, I believe that I'll simply close with the observation. Your point about being holistic, I think, is a good one. Your point about evaluating the net environmental impact, I think, is what no one here would disagree with. I would hope that in consideration of how to make this build something that could be broadly supported, that we are also evaluating the net economic impact, and not simply particular benefit that may accrue to one entity when many other stakeholders may be affected by a project. But I appreciate that you're here today.
Representative Levesky.